My name is Leslie Rios, 32 years old. Everyone here only knows me as a lowly logistics clerk driving an old pickup truck. But what they don't know is that I am a captain in the United States Army, just returned from a combat zone. Last night, at the lavish Hamptons mansion of my fiancé's family, my world collapsed. When I was standing in the darkness of the hallway, I heard my future mother-in-law, Patricia, sneer to her daughter. "Relax, Vivian. Marcus is just using that little piece of trash as a placeholder. Wait until our family finishes closing the merger with the Castellano family. He will kick that uneducated soldier girl to the curb and go back to Alexandra immediately." And more painfully, I saw Marcus, the man I love, standing right there, nodding and taking a sip of expensive scotch. They think I am a naive lamb for them to slaughter. But they forgot one thing. Never declare war on an intelligence officer who holds secrets that can send their whole family to prison. Let me know which state you are listening from in the comments below, and hit subscribe right now if you believe that betrayal must be punished appropriately. The drive from the city to the Hamptons is supposed to be a scenic escape, but for me, it felt like crossing a border into hostile territory. I was behind the wheel of my 2015 Ford F-150. It's not just a truck, it's a tool. It's American steel. It has mud on the wheel wells from the back roads near Fort Bragg and a few scratches on the bumper from hauling equipment during my last rotation. To me, those scratches are badges of honor. They signify work. They signify utility. But as I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate, I realized that in this zip code, my truck was nothing more than an eyesore. The estate was overwhelming, a 3-story colonial mansion with towering white pillars, sitting on acres of manicured green lawn that looked like it had been cut with nail scissors. It screamed money, or at least the desperate desire to display it. I rolled down my window as the house manager approached. He was an older man in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He took one look at my truck, then at me, hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing a simple denim jacket, and his nose wrinkled up instinctively, as if he smelled something rotting. "Service entrance is the third left, around the back," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "Deliveries don't go through the main gate." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. "I'm not a delivery driver," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm Leslie, Marcus's fiancé. I'm here for the dinner party." The man blinked. He actually checked his clipboard twice, looking back at the truck with disbelief. Finally, without an apology, he buzzed the gate open. As I drove through, I could feel his eyes on the back of my truck, judging every inch of it. I drove up the long gravel driveway, the crunch of rocks under my heavy all-terrain tires sounding loud and intrusive in the quiet, sophisticated afternoon. I parked near the fountain, took a deep breath, and stepped out. Patricia Whitmore was waiting on the porch. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine, wearing cream-colored linen pants and a cashmere sweater draped casually over her shoulders. "Patricia," I smiled, forcing warmth into my voice as I walked up the steps with my hand extended. "It's so good to finally see the house." She didn't take my hand. Instead, she took a subtle step back. Her eyes scanned me from my scuffed leather boots up to my jacket, her expression pained. She reached out not to embrace me, but to brush a speck of imaginary dust off my shoulder. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that chilled me to the bone. I honestly thought the Amazon delivery driver had made a mistake and come to the front door. "You look so rugged." She said the word rugged like it was a synonym for dirty. "I came straight from the base," I explained, dropping my hand to my side. Traffic was heavy on the I-495. "Well," she sighed, a dramatic puff of air. "I suppose it can't be helped, though I do hope you brought something appropriate to wear for dinner. The Castellanos are stopping by later, and we have standards to maintain." Before I could defend myself, the front door opened and Marcus walked out. My heart did that familiar little skip. He looked perfect in a crisp navy polo and khakis, the picture of a Hamptons golden boy. I waited for him to say something, to tell his mother that I looked fine, or to kiss me hello. Instead, his eyes went straight to my truck parked in the driveway. "Hey, babe," he said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He gave me a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. Listen, Mom's kind of right. The truck it's a lot. It's my car, Marcus, I said, confusion knitting my brow. You've ridden in it 100 times. I know. But here, it's different. He lowered his voice, leaning in close so the house manager wouldn't hear, conspiring with me against my own dignity. Could you move it, park it around the back, behind the kitchen, near the recycling bins? I stared at him. You want me to hide my car by the trash? Just so it doesn't block the view, he pleaded, giving me that puppy dog look he knew I had a soft spot for. The Castellanos are driving their new Porsche over, and we want the driveway clear for the photos. Please? For me? Exclusion. That was the feeling washing over me. It wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about erasing me. It was about hiding the blue-collar reality of his life so he could pretend to be something he wasn't. But I loved him. Or I thought I did. So I nodded, swallowing my pride. Fine, I'll move it. I got back in my truck and moved it to the back service area, parking it next to a row of overflowing recycling bins that smelled of stale beer and lobster shells. Sitting there for a moment, gripping the wheel, I felt smaller. I felt like I was entering a war zone without my armor. When I walked back to the front and stepped into the foyer, the air inside was cool and smelled of expensive lilies. The floors were polished marble, shining under a massive crystal chandelier. The sound of my worn-out leather boots echoed, thud, 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 a heavy working-class rhythm disrupting a delicate, high-class world. In the living room, Marcus's sister, Vivian, was lounging on a velvet sofa, holding a martini glass. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my boots with open disdain. She leaned over to her mother, whispering loudly enough for the entire room to hear, making sure I caught every word. Good Lord, Vivian sneered, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. She looks like a refugee seeking asylum. Are we running a charity shelter now? My hands curled into fists at my sides. The heat rose in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. The discipline of the army was the only thing that kept me from turning around and walking out right then and there. I took a breath, centered myself, and remembered what my grandmother, Margaret Graham, used to tell me when I was a kid getting bullied for my thick glasses. Leslie, she would say, never let appearances deceive you, and never deceive others with appearances. The wolf often wears the finest wool, but he is still a beast. I lifted my chin, looked Vivian straight in the eye, and walked into the room. The battle had begun. The dining room was a theater of intimidation. A long mahogany table stretched out under the dim, golden glow of a crystal chandelier, set for 6 but feeling like it was laid out for an inquisition. I took my seat next to Marcus. Across from me sat Vivian, and at the head of the table, Patricia presided like a queen on her throne. To my right sat a man introduced as Mr. Richard Hartley, a business partner of the family, who had barely said a word since I entered. Dinner was served by hired staff, filet mignon with asparagus and truffle mashed potatoes. It smelled expensive. It smelled like the kind of meal where you're supposed to keep your elbows off the table and your opinions to yourself. For the first 10 minutes, the only sounds were the scraping of silver knives against fine china and the polite, empty chatter about the weather and the upcoming polo season. I focused on cutting my steak, trying to make myself as small as possible. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. In the army, we call this the calm before contact. Patricia took a sip of her wine and set the glass down with a deliberate clink. So, Leslie, she began, her eyes fixing on me with a predatory gleam. Marcus tells us you're in the army. That sounds intense. What exactly do you do? I assume it involves a lot of shouting and shooting. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, keeping my posture straight. Actually, Patricia, I'm a captain specializing in strategic logistics. My job involves coordinating supply chains for deployed units, managing intelligence on transport routes, and ensuring that our troops have the resources they need to survive in hostile environments. I was proud of my work. It required a master's degree, high-level security clearance, and the ability to make split-second decisions that could save or lose lives. Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh. She swirled her martini, looking bored. Logistics? Vivian smirked, looking at her mother. Mom, that's just a fancy word for shipping, isn't it? Like, packing boxes in a warehouse? She turned her gaze to me, her eyes deadpan. So, basically, you're like a supervisor at an Amazon fulfillment center? Do you have to tape the boxes yourself, or do you just tell the other grunts where to put the labels? I assume a job like that doesn't really require a college degree, does it? Just a strong back? The insult was so casual, so ignorant, that for a moment, I was stunned. She was reducing the complex, vital network of military operations to unskilled manual labor. It's a bit more complicated than that, Vivian, I said, my voice tight. We manage millions of dollars in assets, and… Assets? Patricia interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. It all sounds very blue-collar, doesn't it? Very… hands-on. She picked up a bottle of wine, a 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon that had been breathing on the sideboard. She poured a generous amount into Marcus's glass, then Vivian's, then her own. When she got to me, she paused. Oh, wait, Patricia said, pulling the bottle back. I almost forgot. Marcus mentioned you prefer beer, or something simpler. She reached for a different bottle, a cheap table wine with a screw top that had been sitting separately, and poured a splash into my glass. You know, Patricia continued, looking wistfully at the empty chair next to Marcus. When Alexandra used to come for dinner, you remember Alexandra, don't you, Marcus? The Castellano heiress? She always knew exactly which vintage to pair with the steak. She had such a refined palate. She could tell the difference between a Napa Valley and a Bordeaux with one sip. Not like this. Watered-down vinegar. She gestured vaguely at my glass. The comparison hung in the air like a foul smell. She wasn't just talking about wine. She was talking about breeding. She was talking about class. Alexandra was the purebred show dog. I was the stray mutt they let in from the rain. I felt the heat rising up my neck. I looked at Marcus. This was the moment. This was the moment a man stands up for the woman he plans to marry. Marcus, I said softly. He didn't look at me. He was staring intently at his steak, sawing at it with his knife. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound was excruciating in the silence. The steak is excellent, Mom, Marcus mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. Really tender. He was ignoring me. He was letting them strip away my dignity layer by layer, and he was choosing to talk about the beef. That hurt more than Vivian's ignorance or Patricia's cruelty. It was a silent betrayal. Pause the story for a second. I need to ask you something, right now. Look at me. Have you ever sat at a table where you knew you weren't wanted? Have you ever had someone look at your hard work, your career, or your life, and dismiss it as nothing just because it didn't come with a fancy trust fund? It burns, doesn't it? It makes you want to scream. If you believe that respect is earned by character and hard work, not by daddy's money, I want you to hit that like button right now. And leave a comment below with just one word. Respect. Let's show these people that we outnumber them. I took a breath, forcing myself not to cry. I reached for my wine glass, the cheap one, to take a drink, just to do something with my hands. As I gripped the stem of the glass, I felt eyes on me. I looked up. It was Mr. Richard Hartley. The older man at the end of the table. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at my hand. Specifically, he was looking at the calluses on my palm and the hardened skin on my trigger finger. The unmistakable marks of someone who spends hours at the range. Someone who handles cold steel and heavy equipment. He looked from my hand to my eyes. He didn't smile, but for the first time that night, I saw something other than disdain. I saw recognition. Strategic logistics, Richard said. His voice was gravelly and deep, stopping the conversation cold. That's the backbone of the Corps. Napoleon once said, amateurs talk about tactics, but professionals study logistics. Patricia blinked, confused by the interruption. Oh, Richard, please, don't encourage her war stories. Richard didn't look at Patricia. He kept his eyes locked on mine and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. It was a lifeline. but even a lifeline feels heavy when you're drowning in a sea of sharks. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound echoed loudly on the floor. "I need to use the restroom." I walked out of the dining room with my head high, but inside, I was shaking. I needed air. I needed to get away from the smell of their expensive perfume and their rotting souls. I turned down the hallway, looking for a place to breathe, not realizing I was walking straight into the dark heart of their conspiracy. I walked out of the dining room, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a soft, expensive-sounding click, muffling the clinking of silverware and the high-pitched laughter of people who had never worked a day in their lives. I told them I needed to use the powder room, but in reality, I just needed to breathe. The air in there was suffocating, thick with the scent of roasted meat and judgment. My chest felt tight, a physical reaction to the psychological warfare I had been enduring for the last hour. I walked down the long hallway, my boots sinking into the plush Persian runner. I intended to head toward the guest bathroom near the foyer, but my feet carried me deeper into the house. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the subconscious urge to scout the perimeter, a habit I'd never quite shaken after 2 tours in the Middle East. The house was massive, a labyrinth of shadows and silence. I found myself in the West Wing, an area I knew was reserved for the family's private quarters and offices. I stopped. I shouldn't be here. I turned to head back, but then I froze. At the end of the hall, a strip of yellow light sliced across the floorboards. The door to Mr. Whitmore's study was ajar. Just a crack, maybe 3 inches. A normal person would have walked away. But I'm not a normal person. I'm an intelligence officer. When something doesn't feel right, you don't ignore it. You investigate. I moved closer. I shifted my weight effortlessly, employing the ghost walk technique we used on night patrols, rolling from the outside edge of the foot to the toe, making 0 sound. I pressed my back against the wall, merging with the shadows next to a marble bust of some long-dead Roman emperor. Voices floated out from the room. "She is painfully dull, isn't she?" It was Vivian. I could hear the clink of glass against a bottle. "I honestly don't know how Marcus stands it. Did you see her boots? I've seen better footwear on homeless people in the subway." My jaw tightened, but I stayed still. Insults I could handle. I'd heard worse from drill sergeants. Then Patricia spoke, her voice lower, sharper. "It doesn't matter what she wears, Vivian. Stop focusing on the aesthetics and look at the strategy. She's naive. She's desperate for approval. That makes her useful." "Strategy? Useful?" My ears pricked up. "I still don't get why we have to endure this charade," Vivian whined. "Why couldn't he just stay with Alexandra? The Castellano merger would have been signed months ago." "Because," Patricia hissed, her tone impatient, "the Castellanos are traditional Catholics. They were furious when Marcus and Alexandra had that public spat last year. We needed a palate cleanser. We needed Marcus to look like a reformed man, a man seeking stability with a simple girl from a humble background. It makes him look grounded to the shareholders and the press." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So she's a prop," Vivian laughed. "A prop with bad hair." "She's a decoy," Patricia corrected coldly. "We use her to keep the Castellanos jealous and the board of directors calm. Once the merger is signed next month and the liquidity flows back into the company, Marcus will dump her. We'll say the cultural differences were too great. Then he'll have a tearful reunion with Alexandra, and the stock price will soar." Decoy. The military term hit me like a physical blow. A decoy is something you throw out to draw enemy fire. It's something you sacrifice so the high-value target can survive. To them, I wasn't a human being. I wasn't a woman who loved their son. I was a tactical, expendable asset. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I wanted to run. I wanted to barge in there and flip the table. But I couldn't move. Because I heard heavy footsteps approaching from the other side of the room inside. "There you are," a male voice said. "Marcus." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Defend me," I prayed. "Tell them they're wrong. Tell them you love me." "God, Mom," Marcus groaned. I heard the distinct sound of him pouring a drink, the glug 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 of heavy liquid. Can I come back in here? She's driving me crazy out there. Just a little longer, sweetheart, Patricia cooed. She's so annoying, Marcus complained. His voice was slurred, petulant. She keeps asking about the business. She keeps trying to help, and she smells like, I don't know, machine oil and cheap soap. I miss Alexandra. I miss the way Alex smells like Chanel No. 5. I miss a woman who knows how to walk in heels. I know, baby, Patricia soothed him. Be patient. 3 more weeks. Once the papers are signed on the 15th, you can kick her to the curb. Then you can have your Porsche back and your Alexandra. 3 weeks, Marcus sighed, the sound of ice rattling in his glass. I don't know if I can keep pretending to be attracted to her for that long. It's exhausting. The hallway spun. The pain wasn't sharp. It was a dull, crushing weight like a building collapsing on top of me. The man I had nursed through the flu. The man I had planned a future with. The man I had trusted. He was repulsed by me. He wasn't just weak. He was an active participant in my destruction. I slid down the wall slightly, my knees shaking. Tears threatened to spill, hot and stinging behind my eyes. I felt like a little girl again, excluded from the playground, unwanted and unloved. No. I squeezed my eyes shut. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted the copper tang of blood. The pain centered me. I am not a little girl. I am a captain in the United States Army. I have led convoys through the valleys of Afghanistan. I have analyzed intelligence that took down terror cells. I do not cry because a boy doesn't like my perfume. I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. In their place was something else, something cold, something hard. A memory surfaced. My grandmother, Margaret, sitting on her porch in Texas, reading from her worn-out leather Bible. Psalm 124:1. The words echoed in my mind, drowning out Marcus's whining voice. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat steadied. The shaking in my knees stopped. They wanted a war. They just got one. But they wouldn't be fighting the naive logistics clerk they thought they knew. They would be fighting a ghost. I stood up, smoothing the front of my denim jacket. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. The mission parameters had changed. The objective was no longer marriage. The objective was now search and destroy. I turned away from the door, my steps silent on the carpet. I didn't go back to the dining room. I headed for the side exit towards the terrace. I needed fresh air. And I needed to find the only other person in this house who looked like they knew the smell of gunpowder. I pushed open the heavy French doors and stepped out onto the stone terrace. The night air was crisp and cold, carrying the salty tang of the Atlantic Ocean, which was only a few miles away. It hit my flushed face like a splash of ice water, shocking my system back into focus. I closed the doors behind me, muffling the sounds of the house. The clinking glasses, the jazz music, the fake laughter. Out here, there was only the sound of the wind in the manicured hedges and the distant rhythm of the waves. I leaned against the cold stone balustrade, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge. I needed to scream. I needed to break something. But I couldn't. Not yet. You're standing at attention, Captain. The voice came from the shadows at the far end of the terrace. I spun around, my body instinctively dropping into a defensive stance. Mr. Richard Hartley stepped out of the darkness. He was holding a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a lit cigar in the other. The smoke curled up around his silver hair, smelling of rich tobacco and leather. He didn't look like the other guests inside. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a trendy slim-fit suit. He was wearing a classic boxy navy blazer that looked like it had seen a decade of board meetings. He walked toward me, his gait steady, his back ramrod straight despite his age. At ease, he said, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. I didn't mean to startle you. I just came out here to escape the perfume cloud inside. It was starting to burn my eyes. I relaxed my shoulders, exhaling slowly. Mr. Hartley. Call me Richard, he said. He took a drag of his cigar and looked me up and down. Not with the judgmental sneer of the Whitmores, but with an appraising, professional eye. You know, I've been watching you all night, Leslie. The way you scan the room, the way you check the exits, the way you hold your silence when fools are speaking. I know that look. He pointed the glowing end of his cigar toward me. That's the look of someone who knows the difference between a firecracker and a mortar shell. I smell gunpowder and discipline on you, young lady. And I don't mean figuratively. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. On his right hand, the hand holding the whiskey glass, a heavy gold ring glinted in the moonlight. I recognized the emblem instantly, the eagle, globe, and anchor. Semper Fi, Sergeant? I asked softly. Richard's eyes widened slightly. He looked down at his ring, then back at me, his expression softening into genuine warmth. Ura, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Vietnam. And you? Army, I said. 101st Sustainment Brigade. Just got back from the sandbox. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. It's a language that civilians, people like Patricia and Vivian, will never speak. It's the language of service, of sacrifice, of knowing that your life depends on the person standing next to you. Well, Captain, Richard said, gesturing with his glass toward the closed doors, then you and I are the only 2 real people in this zip code. Tell me, what is a serious woman like you doing in a circus like this? I looked at the glass doors. Through the panes, I could see Marcus laughing with his mother. The sight made my stomach turn. I thought I was building a life, I said, my voice bitter. Turns out I was just walking into an ambush. Richard chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You and me both, kid. You and me both. He took a sip of his drink and leaned against the railing next to me. I'm supposed to sign a deal with Harold and Patricia next week, a massive investment to modernize their dealership network. They've been whining and dining me for a month, showing me projections, colorful charts. But my gut says it's FUBAR. He used the military acronym for fouled up beyond all recognition. They talk too much, Richard continued, staring out at the dark lawn. People with money talk about ideas. People with debt talk about money. And the Whitmores? They haven't stopped talking about how profitable they are since I walked in the door. It feels like a hustle. I looked at him. This man was about to lose millions. He was an honorable man, a veteran, being played by the same people who were destroying me. I made a decision. Trust your gut, Richard, I said, my voice low and steady. Keep your wallet closed. He turned to look at me, his eyes narrowing. What do you know? I know that they are insolvent, I said. I know that the merger they are bragging about is a desperate bailout. And I know that they are using me as a decoy to stall for time until the ink dries. Richard froze. The smoke from his cigar drifted between us. A decoy? They think I'm just a dumb logistics clerk, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. They think I'm poor. They think I'm stupid. They plan to let Marcus dump me in 3 weeks, once they have your money and the Castellano deal. Richard's face darkened. The friendly grandfather was gone. The Marine was back. His jaw set hard. Those son of a bitches. I knew it. I knew they were snakes. He looked at me with renewed curiosity. But why are you telling me this? If you expose them, you blow up your own engagement. You lose. Well, whatever this is. I turned to face him fully. I don't care about the engagement anymore. That's dead. I care about the mission. And my mission now is to make sure they don't take a single dime from honest people. I took a step closer. My name is Leslie Rios. My father was a mechanic, but my mother, her maiden name was Graham. Richard stared at me. He blinked once, twice, then his mouth fell open slightly. Graham? He whispered. As in, Margaret Graham? Graham Defense Industries? She was my grandmother, I said. She raised me. She taught me how to shoot, how to drive a truck, and how to spot a liar from a mile away. For a second, there was silence. Then Richard threw his head back and let out a bark of laughter, a loud, genuine, belly-shaking sound that echoed into the night. He laughed until he had to wipe a tear from his eye. Oh, sweet Jesus, he wheezed, shaking his head. They are trying to hustle Margaret Graham's granddaughter. They are treating the heiress to the Iron Lady's fortune like she's the help. He looked at the house, shaking his head in disbelief. They just kicked a hornet's nest. No, scratch that. They just poked a stick into a fire ant hill. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with delight. He tossed the rest of his cigar over the railing and extended his hand. It was a large, calloused hand, a working man's hand despite the expensive suit. I have access to their preliminary financials, Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If they are cooking the books, I can find the discrepancies, but I need legal cover if I'm going to pull the plug publicly. I have the best lawyers in New York on retainer, I replied, gripping his hand firmly. And I have the intel on their personal misconduct. We combine our assets. We coordinate our fire. A joint operation, Richard smiled, squeezing my hand. I like the sound of that. I'll provide the financial ammo. You provide the kill shot. Deal, I said. It's an honor to serve with you, Captain, he said. The honor is mine, Richard. As we stood there, shaking hands in the moonlight, I felt the cold knot of loneliness in my chest loosen. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I wasn't just a heartbroken girl crying in the hallway. I was a commander building an army. And the war had just begun. In the army, we have a saying. In God we trust, all others we monitor. For the past 14 months, my job was to track supply lines through hostile territory. I learned how to spot an IED buried in the dirt from 50 yards away. I learned how to read the body language of a local elder to see if he was lying about insurgent movements. Compared to that, tracking a cheating fiancé and a corrupt socialite in Manhattan was barely a warm-up exercise. I requested 72 hours of personal leave. I didn't go back to the base. Instead, I swapped my fatigues and my flannel shirts for a nondescript beige trench coat, dark sunglasses, and a black baseball cap. I became invisible. I became just another face in the crowded streets of New York City. 900 hours, Upper East Side. I parked my F-150 in a parking garage 3 blocks away, too big, too conspicuous for this neighborhood, and took up a position across the street from Marcus's apartment building on East 72nd Street. I sat at a sidewalk cafe, nursing a black coffee, blending in with the nannies and the dog walkers. My phone was propped up against the sugar dispenser, the camera lens capable of 10x optical zoom aimed directly at the garage exit. At 10:45 a.m., the garage door rolled up. My stomach tightened, but my hand remained steady. A silver Porsche 911 Carrera slid out into the sunlight. It gleamed like a polished bullet. This was the same car Marcus had sworn to me, looking me dead in the eye, was in the shop in Jersey with a blown transmission. He had told me the parts were on backorder from Germany. Visual confirmation, I whispered to myself, snapping a burst of high-resolution photos. Subject is operating the vehicle alleged to be out of commission. He wasn't alone for long. He pulled over to the curb a few blocks down. A woman stepped out of a boutique, Alexandra Castellano. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than my annual base pay, her hair blowing perfectly in the wind. She opened the passenger door and slid in, leaning over to kiss him before the door even closed. I hailed a cab. Follow that Porsche, I told the driver. Keep 2 cars between us. There's a 50 in it for you if they don't spot us. 11:30. Hours, Le Coucou, Soho. They chose Le Coucou, a high-end French restaurant known for its impossible reservations and its pike quenelles. It was the kind of place where the waiters judged your shoes before they showed you to a table. I waited 5 minutes after they entered. Then I walked in. I slipped the maitre d' a crisp $100 bill. I'm meeting friends, but I'm early, I said, keeping my voice low. Put me in the corner booth behind the decorative partition. I want to surprise them. He obliged. I was seated 10 feet away from Marcus and Alexandra, separated only by a large potted fern and a frosted glass divider. It was the perfect listening post. I ordered a sparkling water and placed my phone on the table, activating the high-sensitivity directional microphone app I used for field recordings. I put my earbuds in. Their voices came through crystal clear, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking silverware and jazz. God, Alex, I missed this, Marcus said. I could hear the smile in his voice. I missed real food. Leslie insists on cooking these hearty stews. It's like living in a mess hall. Poor baby, Alexandra cooed. How is the little soldier girl? Is she still wearing those dreadful boots? Don't remind me, Marcus groaned. She's so rigid. Everything is a schedule. Everything is a task. Being with her is like dating a manual. There's no passion, Alex, not like with us. I watched the audio waveforms spike on my screen as he spoke. Every insult was being digitized, time-stamped, and stored in the cloud. Just a few more weeks, Alexandra said. Then the merger goes through and we can buy that summer house in the vineyard. I can't wait, Marcus replied. I'm going to celebrate the day I drop her off back at that base. I felt a cold, hard knot in my chest, but I didn't flinch. I took a sip of my water. Got you, I thought. Adultery. Premeditated deception. Conspiracy. 13:00 hours. The digital drop. Just as the waiter was clearing their appetizers, my phone vibrated with a priority notification. It was an encrypted email from Richard Hartley. The subject line read, "Smoking gun." I opened the attachment. It was a forensic accounting report of the Whitmore Automotive Group's internal finances. Richard had been busy. I scrolled through the spreadsheets, my eyes widening as I processed the data. This wasn't just bad business management, this was grand larceny. Vivian Whitmore, the chief financial officer of the family company, had been systematically siphoning funds for 18 months. But she wasn't stealing from the profits. There were no profits. She was stealing from the employee payroll and pension fund. The report highlighted the transactions in red. $45,000. Hermes Boutique, Madison Ave. $12,000. Spa Weekend, St. Bart's. $150,000. Wire transfer to Borgata Casino, Atlantic City. $25,000. Cash withdrawal. Total misappropriated funds, $2.3 million. She was buying Birkin bags and funding her gambling addiction with the retirement savings of mechanics, receptionists, and salespeople who had worked for their family for decades. These were people who lived paycheck to paycheck, people who trusted the Whitmores with their futures. My blood ran cold. Then it boiled. This was no longer just about a cheating fiancé. This was about justice for every worker getting screwed over by these parasites. I forwarded the file to my secure server. Then I texted Richard. Asset secured. The intel is actionable. Prepare the legal team. 14:30 hours. The synthesis. I left the restaurant before they finished their dessert. I walked back to the parking garage, retrieved my truck, and sat in the cab for a moment, the engine idling. On the passenger seat lay a thick black folder. Inside were the printed photos of Marcus and Alexandra kissing. The transcripts of their conversation about using me. And now, the financial records proving Vivian was a felon. I ran my hand over the cover of the folder. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. I wasn't the naive girl they thought I was. I wasn't the decoy. I was the judge, the jury, and in a few days, I would be the executioner. I put the truck in gear and pulled out into the Manhattan traffic. I had one stop left to make. I had to go home to Marcus, look him in the eye, and give him one last chance to hang himself. I was sitting on the beige sofa in our shared apartment, the lights dimmed low. On the coffee table in front of me, a container of cold Chinese takeout sat unopened. I wasn't hungry, I was waiting. In the military, we call this a tactical pause. It's that moment of stillness before you breach a door, where you check your gear, steady your breathing, and prepare for whatever chaos lies on the other side. At 7:15 p.m., the lock clicked. Marcus walked in. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his top button undone. He ran a hand through his hair, performing the exhausted sigh of a man who has carried the weight of the world on his shoulders all day. "Hey, babe," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud. "Sorry I'm late. The merger paperwork is a nightmare. I've been stuck in a conference room with lawyers since noon." I stood up and walked over to greet him. "You must be exhausted," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I leaned in to hug him, not out of affection, but to gather intel. As my face brushed against his collar, the scent hit me. It was faint, masked by a heavy dose of Listerine Cool Mint mouthwash, but an intelligence officer knows how to separate layers of sensory data. Underneath the mint and the stale office air, there was something floral, something expensive. Chanel No. 5. It was the scent of Alexandra Castellano. He pulled back before I could linger too long, a flash of panic in his eyes. He quickly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small rectangular box wrapped in shiny silver paper. "I know I've been distant lately," he said, putting on a boyish, apologetic smile. "And I know I haven't been the best fiancé. So, I picked this up for you on the way home. Just a little something to say I love you." I took the box. It felt light. Too light. I unwrapped it. Inside was a black velvet pouch containing a thin, gold-colored chain with a small generic heart pendant. "It's beautiful," Marcus said quickly. "I had to work a few extra hours of overtime last week to afford it, but you deserve it." I stared at the necklace. I turned it over in my hand. There was no hallmark on the back. The metal felt warm and cheap against my skin. And then, I recognized the logo on the velvet pouch. It wasn't a jeweler's logo. It was the logo of a high-end department store's fragrance counter. I knew this necklace. I had seen the advertisement in the Sunday paper just yesterday. Receive this exclusive gold-tone heart pendant as a free gift with any purchase of Chanel No. 5 Maisons Eau de Parfum, 3.4 Oz or larger. The realization hit me with the force of a slap. He hadn't worked overtime to buy this. He had bought Alexandra a $150 bottle of perfume, and he had regifted the free promotional trash to me. He was giving me the leftovers of his affair. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I placed the necklace on the table. It made a hollow clink. "I'm going to go wash up," he said, loosening his tie further, eager to escape. "Wait." I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke with the command authority of a captain addressing a subordinate. Marcus froze. "What?" "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me. He sat, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Leslie, I'm tired." "Marcus, look at me." I sat down on the edge of the coffee table, leaning forward so our faces were level. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for a shred of the man I thought I knew. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer," I said. "This is important. Is there anything you need to tell me?" He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about us," I said. "I'm talking about the company. I'm talking about your life outside of this apartment. Is there anything? Financial trouble? Personal issues? Or another person that you are hiding from me? Because if there is, tell me now. We can fix it. But you have to tell me the truth." This was it. The off-ramp. If he confessed now, if he admitted the bankruptcy, the affair, the pressure from his mother, I might have shown mercy. I might have just walked away quietly without burning his world to the ground. Marcus looked at me. For a second, I saw fear. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, but then the mask slid back into place. He let out a scoffing laugh, shaking his head as if I had just told a ridiculous joke. He reached out and placed his hands on my shoulders, squeezing them in a way that felt patronizing, not comforting. "Oh, honey," he sighed, tilting his head. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "You're bringing the war home," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've spent too much time in the field, Leslie. You're seeing enemies where there are none. You're being paranoid. Honestly, it's a little worrying. Maybe you need to see that therapist the VA recommended." My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just lying, he was gaslighting me. He was using my service, my mental health, and my trauma as a weapon to cover his tracks. "So, there's no one else?" I asked, my voice flat. "The company is fine. The car is in the shop." "The company is booming," he lied, looking me dead in the eye without blinking. "The car is waiting for parts, and there is no one else. You are the only woman I see. You are my world, Leslie. Why can't you just trust me?" Friends, I need to pause the story right here because my blood is boiling just retelling this. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. Have you ever had that gut feeling, that intuition that screams at you that someone is lying to your face, but they look you in the eye and call you crazy or paranoid? It's the worst feeling in the world, isn't it? It makes you question your own sanity. But here is the truth. Your gut is almost never wrong. If you have ever dealt with a liar like Marcus, or if you believe that trusting your intuition is your greatest superpower, I want you to hit that like button right now. And please leave a comment below saying, "Trust your gut." Let's remind each other that we are not crazy. We are just observant. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the man who claimed I was his world while wearing another woman's scent. The trial was over. The jury had deliberated. The verdict was guilty on all counts. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the cheap necklace in his face. An intelligence officer doesn't reveal her hand until the trap is fully set. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a smile. It didn't reach my eyes, but Marcus was too arrogant to notice. "You're right," I said softly, standing up. "I'm sorry. I've just been stressed with the transition back to civilian life. I shouldn't have doubted you." Relief washed over his face. He stood up and kissed my forehead. A Judas kiss. "It's okay, babe. I forgive you. Now, let's get some sleep. We have a big week ahead." "Yes," I replied, watching him walk toward the bedroom. "We certainly do." He thought he had won. He thought he had pacified the paranoid little soldier girl. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of slate, the kind of gray, overcast day that hangs heavy over New York City. For most brides-to-be, the morning of their engagement party is a flurry of mimosas, nervous giggles, and hairspray. For me, it was a deployment day. I left the apartment before Marcus woke up. I left a note on the counter saying I had a spa appointment, a lie that fit perfectly into the superficial narrative he had constructed for me. My destination wasn't a salon. It was the granite-pillared headquarters of the First National Bank in Midtown Manhattan. I walked into the private banking division. The air here was different than the air in the Whitmore estate. It didn't smell like desperate ambition. It smelled like old money and quiet power. The manager, Mr. Henderson, greeted me not with a sneer, but with a respectful nod. He didn't see a girl in a denim jacket. He saw the account number associated with my name. "Good morning, Ms. Rios," he said. "Shall I escort you to the vault?" "Yes, please. Box 405. We walked down the marble stairs into the subterranean level. The heavy steel gate buzzed open, and we stepped into the hushed silence of the vault room. It was lined with walls of stainless steel boxes, each one holding the secrets of the city's elite. Mr. Henderson turned his key, I turned mine, and the long metal drawer slid out with a smooth, heavy sound. He stepped back to give me privacy. I lifted the lid. Inside lay the legacy of Margaret Graham. It wasn't just money. It was history. First, I took out the jewelry case. It was worn velvet, smelling faintly of lavender and metal. I opened it. The sapphire suite. A necklace of deep, midnight blue sapphires surrounded by flawless white diamonds with matching drop earrings. My grandmother had worn these to the White House dinner in 1985. They were heavy, cold, and real. Unlike the gold-plated trash Marcus had insulted me with, these stones carried the weight of a dynasty. Next to the jewelry lay a thick manila envelope. The paperwork. I pulled out the stock certificates. My grandmother hadn't just left me cash. She had left me equity. I ran my finger over the documents. Graham Defense Industries. Castellano. Global Imports. I paused on that second one. Yes, my grandmother had been an early investor in the Castellano family business decades ago. According to these papers, the trust in my name held a 15% voting share in the very company the Whitmores were desperate to merge with. I wasn't just a jilted fiancé, I was a major shareholder. A cold smile touched my lips. "Checkmate," I whispered. I placed the jewelry and the documents into my bag. I locked the box. When I walked out of the bank, I didn't feel like Leslie the logistics clerk anymore. I felt the spirit of Margaret Graham walking beside me, her iron spine stiffening my own. 14. hours. The safe house. I didn't go back to the apartment to get ready. I couldn't stomach the idea of dressing for war in the enemy's camp. Instead, I checked into a suite at the Pierre Hotel. Neutral ground. I laid my weapon out on the bed. I had commissioned this dress months ago, originally planning to wear it to a military gala. It was a floor-length gown made of heavy structured silk. The color was a deep, dark midnight blue, the exact shade of the Army Dress Blues uniform. It wasn't a dress designed to be pretty. It was designed to be commanding. High neck, long sleeves, with a back that dipped into a sharp V. No ruffles, no lace, no frills. Just clean, sharp lines that demanded attention. I showered, scrubbing off the scent of the cheap soap Marcus complained about. I dried my hair and pulled it back into a sleek, severe chignon at the nape of my neck. No loose strands, total discipline. I applied my makeup. I kept the eyes sharp, cat-like, but the lips I painted a deep, blood red. It was war paint. I stepped into the dress. The silk slid over my skin like cool water. I zipped it up. It fit like a second skin, like armor. I put on the sapphire necklace. The stones settled against my collarbone, their cold weight grounding me. I put in the earrings. I stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the girl who drove a muddy pickup truck. She was a queen. She was a force of nature. She was terrifying. My phone rang on the bedside table. I picked it up without breaking eye contact with my reflection. "Report," I said. Richard Hartley's voice came through, clear and steady. "I'm at the venue, Captain. The audio system has been patched. The projector is synced to your remote. The guests are arriving. Patricia is already 3 martinis deep and bragging about the merger." "And the package?" I asked. "The forensic accounting team is on standby outside the perimeter," Richard confirmed. "And I have the sheriff, an old friend from the VFW, waiting in the wings with the fraud warrants. We are locked and loaded." "Good," I said. "I'm moving out. ETA 20 minutes. "Give 'em hell, Leslie," Richard said. "Roger that." I hung up. I reached into my purse and pulled out one last item. It was a small brass pin, my grandmother's Distinguished Public Service Medal. I pinned it to the inside of my dress, right over my heart, hidden from view but pressed against my skin. I took a deep breath. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is petty. Revenge is keying a car or throwing a drink. This was about accountability. This was about standing up for every person who had ever been looked down upon, used, and discarded by people who thought their bank accounts gave them the right to play God. "Grandma," I whispered to the empty room. "Watch this." I grabbed my clutch, which held the remote control for the projector and the USB drive containing the evidence. I walked to the door. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Click, clack, click, clack, a rhythm as steady as a drumbeat. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The logistics captain was gone. The Avenger had arrived. By 8 p.m., the Whitmore estate had transformed into a scene from The Great Gatsby, minus the charm. A massive white marquee tent had been erected on the south lawn, filled with round tables covered in heavy linen and centerpieces of white orchids that probably cost more than my truck's transmission. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner, trying to be heard over the din of gossip and clinking champagne flutes. I wasn't in the tent yet. I was waiting in the shadows of the foyer, watching through the open French doors. Patricia was holding court near the ice sculpture. She looked triumphant, flushed with alcohol and the thrill of social climbing. She was surrounded by a gaggle of Hampton's socialites, women who wore their husbands' net worth on their wrists. "Oh, poor Leslie," I heard Patricia say, her voice carrying over the music. "She's probably overwhelmed. You know how it is with girls from that sort of background. They see a salad fork and panic." The women tittered. "I bet she's hiding in the bathroom," Vivian chimed in, adjusting her strapless dress. "Or maybe she's crying in that hideous truck of hers. Honestly, Marcus is a saint for trying to make this work, but I think he's going to announce a postponement tonight." "For her own good, of course." "For her own good," they echoed, nodding sympathetically. I adjusted the strap of my clutch. My pulse was steady, my breathing was rhythmic. "Showtime," I whispered. I signaled the house manager, the same man who had sneered at me yesterday. He looked at me now, in my midnight blue silk gown and the Graham sapphires, and he looked like he was about to faint. He bowed deeply, his hands shaking as he threw open the double doors to the lawn. I stepped out. I didn't walk tentatively. I didn't look down. I walked with the stride of an officer inspecting her troops. The heels of my stilettos didn't click. They struck the stone patio with authority. The effect was instantaneous. It started with the people nearest the door. They stopped talking, then they stopped drinking. Heads turned. The silence rippled outward like a wave, silencing the laughter, silencing the gossip, until even the string quartet faltered and trailed off into an awkward silence. Patricia turned around, annoyed by the sudden quiet. "What on earth is—" Her words died in her throat. I stood at the top of the stone stairs overlooking the lawn. The lights from the tent hit the sapphires around my neck, sending shards of blue and white fire scattering across the crowd. My dress, structured and severe, absorbed the light, making me look like a silhouette cut from the night sky itself. I wasn't the muddy girl in the denim jacket. I was a force of nature. For a moment, no one moved. They were trying to reconcile the image of the poor logistics clerk with the royalty standing before them. Then a deep, booming voice broke the silence. "Captain Rios!" It came from the front row. An elderly man with a silver crew cut and a chest full of ribbons stood up. It was General Holloway, a retired four-star general and a close friend of the Castellano family, the very people Patricia was trying to impress. The general walked toward the base of the stairs, his eyes wide. He wasn't looking at my dress. He was looking at the small brass Distinguished Public Service medal I'd pinned discreetly near my shoulder, and then at the necklace. "Good God," Holloway said, his voice carrying in the dead silence. Is that the Graham sapphire suite, Margaret's necklace?" I nodded once, a sharp, respectful acknowledgement. "Good evening, General. It's been a long time." The whisper started low, like the hum of a hornet's nest, and then exploded into a roar. "Graham? Did he say Margaret Graham? The defense contractor heiress? Wait, she's a captain? I thought Patricia said she was a warehouse worker." The realization hit the room like a shockwave. I wasn't the help. I was the biggest shark in the tank. I looked at Patricia. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her rouge standing out like clown makeup. Her hand trembled violently. The crystal flute she was holding slipped from her fingers. Smash! The sound of shattering glass was deafening in the tense atmosphere. Champagne splattered onto her shoes, but she didn't move. She stared at me with pure, unadulterated terror. She realized in that split second that every lie she had told, every insult she had whispered, had just become a noose around her neck. And Marcus. My fiancé was standing on the small stage at the far end of the tent, holding a microphone, ready to give his speech. The speech where he probably planned to lay the groundwork for dumping me. His jaw was unhinged. He looked at me, then at the general saluting me, and then back at me. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming tank. I began to walk down the stairs. The crowd parted. I didn't have to ask them to move. They scrambled to get out of my way, creating a wide path straight through the center of the tent. I walked past Vivian, who was clutching her purse, the purse bought with stolen money, to her chest as if it could shield her. She couldn't meet my eyes. I walked past Richard Hartley, who was standing near the bar. He raised his glass to me, a savage grin on his face. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just kept walking, steady and relentless, the heavy silk of my dress swishing like the sound of a scythe cutting through wheat. The storm is about to make landfall, ladies and gentlemen. The silence in this room right now is heavier than any weapon I've ever carried. Patricia is shaking, Vivian is hiding, and Marcus knows his life is over. If you are ready to see the wicked get punished, if you are ready to see the little soldier girl take command and burn their house of lies to the ground, I need you to hit that like button right now. Do it for justice. Do it for Leslie. Let's walk up those stairs with her. I reached the stage. Marcus was frozen. He held the microphone loosely, his knuckles white. I stepped up onto the platform, the wooden boards creaking slightly under my heels. I stood toe-to-toe with him. He smelled of sweat and fear. Leslie, he stammered, his voice cracking. You look? I didn't let him finish. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He didn't resist. He surrendered it like a defeated soldier surrendering his sword. I turned to face the crowd. 300 of the wealthiest, most judgmental people in New York were staring at me, waiting. I took a breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. Good evening, I said, my voice amplified, booming across the lawn. I believe there has been a misunderstanding about who I am. Allow me to clarify. The silence on the lawn was absolute. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, the woman in the midnight blue dress standing next to a man who looked like he was about to vomit. Patricia was the first to snap out of the shock. She realized that her carefully curated social empire was about to crumble. She lunged toward the stage, her heels sinking into the grass, waving her arms frantically at the sound technician in the back. "Cut the mic!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Security, get her off the stage. She's drunk. She's having a breakdown." I didn't flinch. I just gripped the microphone tighter and looked down at her with the cold detachment of a judge viewing a disorderly defendant. "Sit down, Patricia," I commanded. My voice boomed through the massive speakers, amplified and distorted slightly by the sheer volume. "Sit down, or I will upload the entire digital dossier to the New York Times right now, instead of just showing it to your friends." Patricia froze mid-step. The threat was real, and she knew it. She stumbled back, collapsing into a chair, clutching her chest. I turned back to the crowd. I saw the confusion, the curiosity. They were hungry for blood, and I was about to feed them. "The Whitmore family loves to talk about mergers and transparency," I said, my voice steady. "They invited you here to celebrate a union. But as a major shareholder of the Castellano Group, the very company they are desperate to merge with, I felt it was my duty to conduct a little due diligence." I raised the small remote control in my hand and pointed it at the massive projection screen behind me, the one they had set up to show a montage of happy couple photos. Click. The screen flickered to life. But instead of a romantic slideshow, a high-resolution photograph appeared. It was taken yesterday. It showed Marcus sitting in a French restaurant, holding Alexandra Castellano's hand, kissing her knuckles. A collective gasp rippled through the tent. I saw heads turn toward the back, where Alexandra was standing. She turned pale, covering her mouth with her hand. "This is Marcus yesterday," I narrated calmly. "At the very moment he told me his car was in the shop." Click. An audio waveform appeared on the screen. I pressed play. Marcus's voice, clear and undeniable, echoed across the lawn. "She's a decoy. We use her to keep the Castellanos jealous. She smells like machine oil. 3 more weeks, then I kick her to the curb." The crowd erupted. The murmur turned into a roar of outrage. "Decoy!" someone shouted. "He called her a decoy." Marcus was shaking his head, reaching for me. "Leslie, please, it's out of context. I didn't mean—" "I'm not finished," I cut him off. I looked at Vivian, who was trying to edge her way toward the exit. "Infidelity is a moral failing," I said, my voice hardening. "But what comes next is a felony." Click. The screen changed. This time it was a spreadsheet, rows of red numbers, bank transfers, withdrawal dates. It was the internal ledger of the Whitmore Automotive Group. "This is the Employee Pension Fund," I explained, using the laser pointer to circle a column. Or rather, what's left of it. Over the last 18 months, Vivian Whitmore, the CFO, has siphoned $2.3 million. I clicked again. Photos of Vivian's new Hermes bags, her receipts from the Borgata Casino, and her first-class flight tickets appeared side by side with the withdrawal dates. "She didn't steal from the profits," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "She stole from the mechanics, from the receptionists, from the people who change your oil and fix your brakes. She stole their retirement to pay for her gambling addiction." The reaction was visceral. In America, you can get away with a lot, but stealing the pension of the working man is a sin that unites everyone in hatred. The wealthy investors in the room looked furious. They realized they had almost poured money into a criminal enterprise. Liar! Vivian screamed, her voice shrill. That's fake. She forged it. It is not fake. The deep voice came from the side of the stage. Richard Hartley stepped up. He didn't need a microphone. His command presence filled the tent. He held up a sheaf of legal documents stamped with the seal of the New York Supreme Court. I am Richard Hartley, he announced, and as of 10 minutes ago, I have withdrawn my investment offer. Furthermore, based on this evidence, the bank has issued an immediate asset freeze on all Whitmore accounts. Insolvent, I said into the mic. The Whitmore family is bankrupt. As if on cue, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. Blue and red lights began to flash against the white canvas of the tent, casting chaotic shadows across the stunned faces of the guests. The police didn't wait at the gate this time. 2 squad cars rolled right onto the grass. 4 officers, accompanied by agents and FBI windbreakers, marched into the tent. Vivian Whitmore, an agent barked. Harold Whitmore, you are under arrest for securities fraud and embezzlement. Pandemonium broke out. Vivian shrieked as an officer grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back. The clicking of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Harold, Marcus's father, slumped in his chair, defeated. Patricia was sobbing hysterically, watching her daughter being led away in front of the very people she had tried so hard to impress. The guests, the generals, the senators, the CEOs, were already turning their backs, making calls, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. The social shunning had begun. I turned to Marcus. He was the only one left standing on the stage with me. He looked small. He looked like a child whose toys had been taken away. He looked at the police, then at me, tears streaming down his face. Leslie, he whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand. Babe, please. I didn't know about the money. I swear. We can fix this. I love you. Don't leave me. I looked at his hand, the hand that had held mine while he lied to my face, the hand that had caressed another woman yesterday. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the gold-tone necklace box, the cheap promotional gift he had given me. I also pulled off the engagement ring he had given me months ago. You love me? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes. Yes, I do. No, Marcus, I said softly. You love the idea of being safe. But you're not safe anymore. I took the ring and the box and threw them. I didn't toss them gently. I hurled them hard, straight at his chest. They hit him with a sharp thwack and clattered to the floorboards. Pick it up, I said, my voice cold as ice. You're going to need to pawn that to pay for your lawyer. I leaned in close to the microphone for one final broadcast. You chose Alexandra. You chose the easy life? Congratulations. Now you two are perfectly matched. I looked out at the crowd, then back at him. You're both empty, you're both fake, and now, you're both broke. I dropped the microphone. Thud. The feedback loop screeched for a second, then went dead. I gathered the skirt of my midnight blue dress and turned my back on him. I walked down the stairs, past the stunned General Holloway, who gave me a slow, solemn nod of respect. I walked past Richard, who winked at me. I walked straight toward the exit, the sirens wailing behind me, leaving the wreckage of the Whitmore dynasty burning in my wake. I didn't look back. Soldiers never look back at the explosion. The sound of a dynasty collapsing is louder than you might expect. Behind me, the white tent was dissolving into absolute chaos. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the canvas, creating a disorienting, nightmarish light show. But the real noise came from the people themselves. I heard Patricia's voice rising above the din, shrill and venomous, screaming not for her daughter, but at her. You stupid, greedy girl, she shrieked, her carefully cultivated accent slipping into something guttural and raw. How could you be so sloppy? You've ruined us. You've ruined everything I built. Me? Vivian yelled back, her voice cracking as the officers guided her head down into the back of the squad car. You pushed me. You told me we needed the cash flow to keep up appearances. This is on you, mother. It was the classic cannibalism of the corrupt. When the ship goes down, the rats don't just swim, they eat each other. I kept walking across the lawn. the damp grass soaking the hem of my midnight blue gown, until I heard running footsteps behind me, frantic, stumbling, and pathetic. "Leslie, wait, please!" It was Marcus. He had somehow pushed past the stunned guests, though a large private security guard stepped into his path, blocking him from getting closer than 10 feet. He looked like a man drowning. "Leslie," he choked out, tears streaming down his face and ruining his expensive spray tan. "Don't leave me here with this. With them. I can testify against Vivian. I can cut a deal. We can start over." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I just paused for a second, letting his desperation wash over me like a cold wind. He wasn't mourning the loss of me. He was mourning the loss of his safety net, looking for a lifeboat in the storm he helped create. I kept walking, realizing I didn't owe him a look, a word, or even a goodbye, because his sentence had already been passed. I reached the service area behind the kitchen where my Ford F-150 sat in the shadows, covered in road dust, looking like a beast of burden in a parking lot full of thoroughbreds. I leaned against the driver's side door and let out a long, shuddering breath, feeling the adrenaline fade into a bone-weary exhaustion. The good kind of tired that comes when the battle is finally won. Looking down at my feet, I realized the strappy designer stilettos were pinching my toes, beautiful instruments of torture disguised as fashion, much like the life I had almost married into. I bent down, unbuckled the straps, and tossed them into the bed of the truck with a hollow thump. Stepping onto the grass with my bare feet, the cold, wet mud squished between my toes, grounding me instantly. It felt real. It felt like freedom. I climbed into the cab, the smell of old leather and coffee welcoming me home, and turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, drowning out the distant sirens. I threw the truck into gear and drove down the long gravel driveway, watching the flashing red lights fade in my rearview mirror until they were nothing but twinkling dots in the darkness. As I turned onto the highway and rolled down the window, letting the cold night air rush in to wash away the scent of expensive perfume and lies, I knew that while this night was ending, my life was just beginning. The weeks that followed that night blurred into a flurry of legal depositions, packing boxes, and long drives, until the chaos finally settled into a disciplined rhythm, leading me to a bright morning 1 month later at Fort Bragg. The sun was shining brilliantly over the parade field, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and heavy starch. I stood at attention, my back straight and my chin up, no longer wearing a silk gown, but standing proud in my Army service uniform, the dress blues. "Attention to orders," the adjutant's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, echoing across the grounds. "The President of the United States has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and abilities of Captain Leslie Rios." My battalion commander, a stern colonel with a kind face, stepped forward to remove the silver bars of a captain from my shoulders, replacing them with the gold oak leaves of a major. "Congratulations, Major Rios," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Well earned." "Thank you, sir," I replied, my voice steady. I looked out into the small audience and saw Richard Hartley in the front row, wearing a crisp suit and smiling like a proud father. He gave me a sharp, crisp salute, and I returned it. A silent communication between warriors who had fought in the trenches together. After the ceremony, as we walked toward the parking lot, Richard handed me a folder. "You wear the oak leaf well, Leslie," he said. And speaking of oak leaves, the lawyers finished the paperwork this morning. I opened the folder to see the charter for our new nonprofit, the Graham Hartley Foundation for Veteran Legal Aid. "We managed to claw back a significant portion of the assets before the Whitmore bankruptcy was finalized," Richard explained. "Vivian is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison, and Patricia is being sued by every creditor in the tri-state area. They are ruined. But the money we secured, it's going to do a lot of good. We're going to help veterans who have been scammed by predatory lenders," I said, running my finger over the mission statement. "We're going to give them the air support they need." "That's right," Richard nodded. "You turned a personal vendetta into a public service. Your grandmother would be proud." I smiled at him, knowing he was right. But there was one final stop I needed to make to truly close this chapter. Later that afternoon, As the sun began to dip low and paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, I drove out to the small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a fancy place, just a peaceful hill shaded by ancient oak trees where my grandmother, Margaret Graham, was buried. I walked up to the simple granite headstone that read, "Truth is the only legacy worth leaving." Kneeling down in the grass, I took the old silver captain's bars from my pocket, the ones I'd worn during the darkest days of my life, and placed them gently on top of the cold stone. "Hey, Grandma," I whispered, the wind rustling the leaves above me like a soft sigh in response. "I did it. I didn't let them break me. I didn't let them change me. They tried to make me feel small because I worked with my hands and worthless because I drove a truck. But you were right." I touched the inscription on the stone. "Character is destiny. They built their house on sand and lies, and it washed away. I built mine on the rock you gave me." I stayed there for a long time, listening to the silence, realizing that the rage which had fueled me through the engagement party was gone, burned up in the fire of justice. What was left was a deep, abiding peace. I stood up, brushed the grass from my knees, and looked at the horizon. I am Major Leslie Rios. I am a soldier. I am a granddaughter. And for the first time in a long time, I am completely free. I turned and walked back toward my truck, ready for whatever mission came next, knowing that no matter what battle I faced, I would never again fight it alone. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought from this journey. The Whitmores had everything society tells us to chase: money, status, and power. But in the end, it was all smoke and mirrors. This story is a powerful reminder that your true worth is never defined by the car you drive, the job title you hold, or the label on your clothes. Real value is defined by your character, your resilience, and how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Integrity is the only currency in this life that never devaluates. So, stand tall in your truth. Like solid steel, it will always outlast a gold-plated lie. Now, I want to turn the mic over to you. We have all met a Patricia who judged us unfairly, or a Marcus who underestimated our strength. I want to hear your story. Have you ever had to trust your gut against a liar? How did you find the courage to walk away and reclaim your dignity? Share your experience in the comments below. This is a safe space where we support each other. And if you enjoyed watching justice finally get served today, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Join our community of truth tellers. Until the next story, stay sharp, trust your instincts, and never apologize for being you.